All right, today is not a silver price story. It is not a central bank story. It is not a conspiracy story. This is a quality story, a refinery floor story, a mold, a furnace, a batch, a surface, a tiny trace element story. Because there is something sitting inside the silver pipeline that almost nobody talks about. And when it shows up, it can turn a beautiful bar into a commercial headache without changing the headline purity in the way most people think it should. And that is why this matters. Because if purity were the whole story, a $9.99 bar would simply be a $9.99 bar. The assay would pass, the product would ship, and nobody would care. End of discussion. But that is not how the real world works. In the real world, two bars can begin almost the same way, move through the same heat, the same molds, the same timing, the same general process, and still come out looking like they were born on different planets. Now, before we go deeper, one quick favor. My YouTube analytics keep showing that a huge number of people watch these videos regularly, but still have not subscribed. So if you get value from this channel, subscribe now and leave a quick comment below so the algorithm knows you are actually here. Because what I am about to show you is not obvious. It is not flashy. It does not scream at you from a chart. But once you see it, you start to understand something bigger about silver itself. Not just its price, not just its purity, its behavior, its hidden weakness, its invisible poison. Imagine this for a second. Two silver bars go into production. Same metal family, same furnace environment, same mold design, same basic temperature range, same operator expectations. On paper, both of them look clean. Both of them read above 99.9% purity. If you stop there, you would expect the result to be close enough that nobody would lose sleep over it. But then the bars cool. One comes out smooth, clean, bright. The kind of surface that makes a buyer relax before the product even gets tested. The kind of finish that tells the eye, even before the lab confirms anything, that somebody knew what they were doing. The other does not. The second bar comes out rough, pitted, uneven, sometimes cratered, sometimes patchy, sometimes just ugly enough that the market does what the market always does when confidence slips even a little. It starts to back away. And here is the uncomfortable part. The problem may not be the silver percentage people obsess over. The problem may be a trace contaminant hiding at levels so small that most normal buyers would never think twice about it. That contaminant is selenium. Now, let us slow down there, because the moment people hear a word like that, they either tune out or they assume this is being overstated. So let us be very clear. This does not automatically mean all silver is compromised. It does not automatically mean your stack is defective. It does not automatically mean every refinery is fighting a crisis. But it does mean something far more important. It means a bar can be technically pure enough to pass a broad purity test and still perform badly in the places that actually matter to producers, mints, dealers, and buyers. That is the distinction. And once you understand that distinction, a lot of things in the bullion world start to make more sense. Because the market does not only care about what a bar is, it cares about how that bar behaves, how it casts, how it looks, how it strikes, how it ships, how it stacks, how it sells, how it reflects on the producer, how much rework it demands, how many complaints it creates, how much scrap it generates, and how much confidence it protects or destroys before a single word is even spoken. That is why this topic is bigger than it sounds. Selenium is one of those elements most people have heard of in a completely different context, if they have heard of it at all. But in silver production, the conversation changes fast. This is not about nutrition. This is not about health supplements. This is about trace chemistry colliding with manufacturing reality, and it can get expensive very quickly. Because once selenium gets into silver and survives far enough into the process, the damage does not always show up as a simple fail on a purity sheet. Sometimes it shows up where producers hate it most. On the surface, in the workability, in the waste rate, in the brand damage, and in the cost of cleaning up a batch that should have been straightforward. That is where the real pain begins. Now here is where a lot of people get surprised. We are not talking about giant chunks of contamination. We are talking about parts per million, tiny quantities. The kind of numbers that sound too small to matter until you see what they can do. The claim from industry commentary is that around 50 parts per million can already start creating visible surface trouble in cast silver. And once you push materially higher, the bar can become commercially unacceptable, even if the silver content still sounds impressive on paper. That is the trap. People hear high purity and assume high quality. Sometimes that is true, sometimes it is incomplete, and sometimes incomplete is enough to cost real money. There is even a dramatic example often cited in discussions like this. A very large silver lot, more than 200,000 ounces, with visual quality reportedly damaged by less than 2 pounds of selenium in the broader mass. Think about that for a second. A tiny amount. a huge pile of metal. And the result is not a chemistry class curiosity. The result is a product problem. That is why refiners care. Not because the numbers are large, because the consequences are. And this is where the story gets even more interesting. Selenium is not some random stranger that wandered into silver by accident one afternoon. It can enter the silver chain for a reason. Silver is very often not mined by itself in the clean, isolated way people imagine. The U.S. Geological Survey says silver is still mainly produced as a byproduct of lead, zinc, copper, and gold mining. And for 2025, it estimates world silver mine output at about 26,000 tons. In other words, silver frequently comes out of more complex metal systems, not neat little silver-only worlds. That matters because complexity upstream creates complexity downstream, and selenium has its own path into that same pipeline. USGS says more than 80% of selenium has historically been produced from anode slimes as a byproduct of primary electrolytic copper refining. So now connect those dots. Silver often rides along with complicated multi-metal production flows, and selenium itself is deeply tied to copper refining residues. That does not prove every silver batch has a selenium issue, but it does explain why the industry cannot afford to treat trace contamination like a fantasy problem. Now layer in the demand side, because this is where a small technical issue stops being small. The Silver Institute says industrial silver demand reached a record 680.5 million ounces in 2024, and the market still posted a 148.9 million ounce structural deficit for the year. So this is not happening in some sleepy, low-stakes environment where producers can casually shrug and say, "We will sort it out later." The modern silver market is already balancing heavy industrial demand, tight supply, and a product chain that has very little patience for avoidable defects. That is why quality control becomes strategic, not cosmetic. Because if demand is strong, if supply is tight, and if silver is flowing through byproduct-heavy systems, then every stage of refining matters more. Not just the headline purity, the entire performance profile. And this is where I want to make a distinction a lot of people miss. A cast bar and a minted product do not experience this problem in the same way. For cast bars, selenium can be brutally honest. Cast products usually do not get the kind of intense rolling, polishing, and finishing that can hide or soften defects the way other products sometimes do. So if the metal wants to show you something ugly, the cast bar is often where you see it first. That is why the surface becomes the crime scene. Pits, roughness, uneven texture, patchy finish, loss of that clean, calm look buyers instinctively trust. And once that happens, it can become a marketability issue fast. Not because the bar stopped being silver, because the bar stopped inspiring confidence. And confidence in this business is not a side issue. It is the issue. Now think about the psychology of a buyer. A bar arrives. The paperwork may look fine. The assay may sound reassuring, but the surface looks wrong. The finish looks wrong. The visual impression says something happened here. That is all it takes for hesitation to enter the room. And hesitation is expensive. Because the second a buyer starts to wonder what else might be wrong, the conversation changes from, "How much do I want?" to, "Do I want this lot at all?" That is how tiny chemistry becomes commercial friction. And if the selenium level is bad enough, producers may have to choose between several unpleasant options. They can try to salvage appearance. They can downgrade the material into less demanding product categories. They can accept lower efficiency. Or they can remelt the metal and start again. Think about the absurdity of that. Metal that can still sound pure enough in a broad sense may still need to be melted again because the surface told the truth the paperwork did not fully capture. That is not a purity lesson. That is a reality lesson. Now, if we move from cast bars to minted products, the problem changes shape. Sometimes it becomes less about ugly surfaces and more about difficult behavior. This is where the production line starts to feel it. Because silver that is more brittle or less cooperative under pressure can create problems during rolling, blanking, and striking. Edges can crack. Blanks can behave inconsistently. Scrap rates can rise. Press settings may have to change. Die wear can increase. Throughput can fall. Costs can creep higher in quiet, frustrating ways. And that is the kind of problem viewers rarely see. You do not see the shortened die life. You do not see the wasted blanks. You do not see the operator adjustments. You do not see the maintenance schedules getting tighter. You do not see the batch that technically worked, but only after chewing through extra time, extra labor, and extra tooling. But the mint sees it. The refinery sees it. The people paying for the mistake definitely see it. And that is why this whole conversation has to be separated from the lazy idea that if the purity number is high, everything else is nitpicking. No, sometimes everything else is the story. because production is where the theory gets punished. And when producers know a batch is not ideal, they do not just sit there and hope for the best. They adapt, they blend, they test, they isolate, they tweak process conditions. In some cases, they may add very small adjustments in the alloying or handling side to improve workability. In other cases, they mechanically improve surfaces. In worse cases, they remelt. None of those steps is free. None of them is fun. All of them exist because the metal has to do more than just satisfy a broad purity label. It has to perform. This is exactly why official standards only tell part of the story. The LBMA's current good delivery specifications say the minimum acceptable fineness for a silver bar is 999.0 parts per thousand. That is an important threshold. It matters. But notice what that standard is telling you and what it is not telling you. It gives you a minimum fineness requirement. It does not magically erase every trace element challenge, every surface issue, or every processing problem that may affect how a bar is received and handled in the real market. So no, this is not a 999 does not matter argument. It absolutely matters. It is a 999 is not the whole story argument, and those are not the same thing. Now let me take this one layer deeper, because this is the part that should make even experienced silver people pause. Selenium is chemically similar enough to sulfur that it can travel in ore environments most ordinary buyers will never think about. That helps explain why the problem may start much earlier than the final pour. The issue can begin in the source material, move through smelting, survive into intermediate stages, and only reveal its full personality later when the metal is cast or worked. That is why catching it early matters so much. And the industry knows that. This is where advanced analytical testing becomes critical. Producers do not want surprises at the end of the line. They want to find problem lots before those lots start becoming finished products. That means assay data. That means elemental testing. That means not relying on the eye alone. Because by the time your eye sees the defect, the money has already started leaking. This is also why premiums in silver can never be reduced to one simplistic explanation. People love to compress everything into one talking point. Premiums are just demand, or premiums are just greed, or premiums are just distribution. Real life is messier than that. Process difficulty matters, refining effort matters, quality control matters, reject rates matter, remelting risk matters, product consistency matters. Some of what you pay for in the real world is not just metal weight, it is process discipline, and that should not be controversial. If one producer consistently delivers clean, stable, commercially trusted product, while another has more variability, the market is going to notice. It always does. Now, I want to pause here and say something directly to the people who actually build things, fix things, operate businesses, or have fought their way into any kind of success. If that is you, share one lesson from your own journey in the comments, because somebody reading that section may need the reminder that progress usually looks messy before it looks obvious. Because this silver story is really that kind of story. From the outside, people see a bar. From the inside, there is metallurgy, sourcing, process control, testing, rework risk, tool wear, timing pressure, batch discipline, and brand reputation all packed into that one object. That is why I keep saying this is bigger than it sounds. And there is another layer to it that makes the whole thing even more fascinating. For most of history, refiners could observe that some silver behaved badly without necessarily understanding exactly why. Certain lots were harder to work, certain lots cracked more easily, certain lots looked worse. But seeing the effect is not the same thing as identifying the cause. Modern analytical chemistry changed that. It allowed the industry to detect tiny trace levels that older operators could only experience through symptoms. That is a huge shift, because once you can measure a problem, you can manage it. Not perfectly, not cheaply, not always cleanly, but you can stop pretending it is mysterious. And selenium is exactly that kind of problem. Invisible at first, expensive later. Now, let us talk about why this should matter to viewers who are not refiners and are not running mints. Because you may be thinking, fine, this is interesting, but I buy silver. I'm not operating a furnace. Why should I care? Fair question. You should care because this is one of those topics that exposes the difference between retail narratives and industrial reality. It teaches you that metals are not abstract. They are physical. They have behavior. They have quirks. They have hidden costs. And those hidden costs can shape what reaches the market, what gets rejected, what gets remelted, what gets priced differently, and what earns trust. In other words, the silver you buy has a story long before it reaches your hand. And if you are serious about the space, that should matter to you. Because once you understand that quality can fail before purity visibly fails, you stop looking at silver like a cartoon. You stop flattening the entire subject into price targets and slogans. You start respecting the actual chain. Mine, smelter, refinery, assay, melt, mold, strike, inspection, distribution, market acceptance. Every one of those steps can either protect value or quietly damage it. That is why I call selenium an invisible poison. Not because it destroys every ounce it touches, not because it turns silver into something else, but because it can sit there quietly, pass farther through the system than people expect, and then punish the product where the punishment hurts most. Surface, workability, efficiency, saleability. That is a nasty combination. And here is something else worth thinking about. In a market where industrial demand is already strong, where the silver deficit has lasted multiple years, and where more silver is needed for electronics, power infrastructure, vehicle electrification, and solar-linked uses, the pressure to keep output usable and consistent only goes higher. The Silver Institute's latest survey makes that backdrop very clear, and it is exactly why small technical issues can no longer be dismissed as side notes. Because when a market is comfortable, inefficiency gets tolerated. When a market is tight, inefficiency gets exposed. And that is where trace contamination starts to matter more than casual observers think. Now, I want to bring this down to a simpler picture. If you had two bars in front of you, both sold as high-purity silver, but one looked wrong enough that the market hesitated, which one would you trust more? The one with the prettier paperwork, or the one with the cleaner behavior? Let me know in the comments, because that question goes straight to the heart of what trust actually means in the bullion world. And speaking of staying ahead of these details, by the time you are watching this, the members-only video is already live. Join the membership if you want all the major updates collected in one place, because that is where I go more in depth. And for premium members, I will keep sharing the deeper analysis there for the people who are genuinely following this story closely. Also, if you want faster alerts when something important drops, the WhatsApp channel link is below. That is the easiest way to stay connected between uploads without missing the key moves. Now, let us go back to the metal itself. One reason this topic hits so hard is because it destroys a very comfortable assumption. People want precious metals to be simple. They want a number, a stamp, a weight, a premium, and a verdict. Good or bad, buy or avoid, authentic or fake. But real metal production does not live in that cartoon version of reality. Real metal production lives in the margins. Trace elements, process windows, temperature behavior, mechanical response, surface chemistry, lot management, rework decisions. That is where money is saved or lost. And once you accept that, the whole bullion conversation gets smarter. Because then you can appreciate why some products are more trusted than others, why some brands protect reputation aggressively, why some lots may be remelted even when the average viewer thinks, what is the big deal? Why some operations invest heavily in testing, why consistency itself becomes a product. Consistency is not an accident. It is bought, measured, protected, sometimes painfully. And if a producer lets selenium problems slip far enough, the cleanup can be brutal. Mechanical finishing may help in mild cases. Surface treatment may recover marketability. But if the defect profile is too severe, you are back to remelting, reprocessing, and explaining why something that looked good enough on one document was not good enough for the real world. That is how margins disappear. And remember, the official minimum fineness standard for a good delivery silver bar may be 999.0, but the commercial world lives above the bare minimum whenever it can, because nobody serious wants to build a reputation on barely acceptable. They want stable results. They want confidence. They want product that does not create questions the moment it arrives. That is the mindset. Not, can we technically get away with this? But, will this product behave the way the market expects? There is a huge difference between those two standards, even when the assay sheet looks respectable. And that is why this entire story lands with such force. It reminds us that the most dangerous weaknesses are often not dramatic. They are subtle. They sit below the obvious threshold. They live in the blind spot created by oversimplified thinking. That is where selenium belongs. Now let me say something important for ordinary buyers so nobody leaves this video with the wrong takeaway. This is not a panic message. This is not me telling you that the silver market is full of poisoned bars and hidden disasters. Most retail buyers never directly see this issue precisely because professional producers usually catch and manage problems before product gets that far. That is the whole point of the testing, blending, process adjustments, and quality control. The reason this stays invisible to most people is because the industry fights hard to keep it invisible. But that does not make it irrelevant. It makes it impressive. Because the more you learn about what goes into a clean final product, the more respect you should have for the operations that consistently get it right. And that brings me to a broader point about precious metals in general. The market loves shiny narratives. The real world rewards disciplined process. That is true in mining, that is true in refining, that is true in minting, and frankly, that is true in life. A lot of success looks effortless from the outside because somebody did the hard part before you ever arrived. So, if you are one of those people who has built something, fixed your finances, grown a business, improved your life, or stayed steady through a difficult stretch, drop one honest success lesson in the comments. It does not have to be big, it just has to be real. People read those comments more than you think, and your words may help somebody who is still in the ugly middle of their own process. Now back to silver. What fascinates me most here is that selenium exposes the gap between visible metal and invisible quality. Because when viewers think about silver, they usually think in ounces and price. When refiners think about silver, they also think in behavior. And behavior is where the story changes. Can it cast cleanly? Can it strike cleanly? Can it hold a finish? Can it avoid excessive scrap? Can it protect the tooling? Can it move through production without turning a routine batch into a problem batch? Those questions do not show up on the front label, but they matter. And they matter even more in an era when silver's industrial importance is rising. Again, current data shows that industrial demand hit another record in 2024, and supply remained structurally short. That means silver is not just a monetary talking point or a collector object. It is a working metal under real-world pressure. That is why purity alone is a lazy shortcut. Necessary? Yes. Sufficient? Not always. And that is the lesson I want people to leave with, because the phrase, invisible poison, is dramatic, yes, but it is not empty drama. It is a reminder that in precious metals, tiny things can have outsized consequences. A few parts per million can trigger surface defects. Slight brittleness can increase scrap. A small contamination issue can become a brand issue. A hidden chemistry detail can become a marketability problem. That is real. And the silver industry knows it is real, whether the average buyer sees it or not. So when you see a clean bar, a sharp round, a consistent finish, a product that looks effortless, remember that effortless is often the final illusion created by a lot of upstream discipline. Somebody had to source correctly. Somebody had to test correctly. Somebody had to control the batch. Somebody had to catch what you never saw. That is the hidden labor inside trust. And trust is everything in bullion. Without trust, a bar becomes a question. With trust, a bar becomes liquidity. That is the difference. And it is also why small quality failures can have such a large commercial impact. Not because the silver stopped being silver, because hesitation is contagious. Once confidence slips, everyone down the line becomes more careful. Buyers inspect harder, sellers explain more, discounts appear, reputations get tested, all from something that may start at the level of trace contamination most people never imagined could matter. That is why this subject is worth your time, because it makes you a smarter observer of the entire market. Now, one more question before we close. Do you think the average silver buyer focuses too much on the stamp and not enough on the production story behind the metal? I genuinely want to know where you stand on that, because this is exactly the kind of detail that separates surface-level interest from real understanding. And again, if you are getting value here, subscribe to the channel. Most people wait, then forget, and the strange part is they keep coming back to watch without ever clicking the one button that actually helps the channel grow. So if you want to support the work, subscribe, leave a comment, and stay in the loop. Also, do not forget the WhatsApp channel if you want updates faster, and the membership if you want the deeper breakdowns in one place. The members-only video should already be up by now, so if you want the full chain of updates without waiting for scattered uploads, that is where to go next. Here is the bottom line. Silver does not only live or die by the purity number printed on the label. It lives or dies by what happens before that label is printed. By the ore body, by the refining path, by the trace elements, by the testing discipline, by the process decisions, by the willingness to reject, rework, or remelt when something is not right. And selenium, despite being tiny in quantity, sits right in the middle of that lesson. It can hide in the chain. It can survive longer than people expect. It can damage surfaces. It can hurt workability. It can raise scrap. It can shorten tool life. It can force rework. It can make a technically pure-looking batch commercially awkward. That is not a side note. That is the story. So the next time somebody reduces silver quality to one number, remember this conversation. Remember that 2 bars can look similar on paper and very different in the hand. Remember that the market often reacts to behavior, not just labels. And remember that the invisible problems are usually the ones worth studying, because by the time they become visible, the cost has already arrived. That is what makes selenium such a powerful example. It is small, it is quiet, it is easy to ignore, and under the wrong conditions, it can completely change the outcome. That is the kind of detail that turns a casual silver watcher into a serious one. And honestly, that is why I wanted to cover it. Because these are the topics that force us to think beyond slogans, beyond recycled talking points, beyond the easy version of precious metals. This is where the real story lives, in the gap between what the eye expects, what the assay says, and what the metal actually does. That gap is everything. And when you understand that, you understand why quality control is not some boring back-office function. It is one of the hidden foundations of the silver market itself. If you made it this far, you already know this was not a surface-level video. So subscribe if you have not, leave your take below, share one real success lesson if you have one, and check the membership plus the WhatsApp channel if you want the full stream of updates without missing the important ones. Because in a market full of noise, the smallest hidden detail can sometimes explain the biggest difference of all.